Hello, welcome to the Poetry Pcast. My name is Patricia, and I'm really looking forward to bringing you today's podcast, which is a little bit weird because it's a podcast on death poetry. It's going to be the first of a two-part series of podcasts. I'll share what I've learnt with you, read you some poetry, and give you a clue as to what I'll be expecting next month in the death poem submission period. And I warn you, there will be rabbit holes. I can't help myself. Hopefully this is enough notice for most folks. April 1st to 15th, 2025 will be open for death poetry. Of course, some poets join us a little bit late, so if that's you, head over to the drop-down diary on the submissions page to find out what we're up to. But only after you've listened. And don't forget, over on the Poetry P YouTube channel, there's a video prompt every month, except December. Linda, our video prompt editor, reads all the poems and chooses several of them to feature on the podcast and in the Poetry P journal. And you know what? I often find that some are nominated for the various awards we nominate to come the end of the year. But here's the thing. They can only be considered if they're in the comments. So please don't send them directly to me. I don't want you to miss out. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see the slides for today's presentation. If not, you can go to Poetry P's YouTube channel and watch there, or to the website and get hold of the show notes. ISA and Busan members, of course, have the show notes drop into their mailboxes every Tuesday. And this time, there's going to be bonus content in the show notes. Do think about taking out a membership to support Poetry P, or maybe just buy us a coffee from time to time, and let us know you appreciate what we're doing. Okay, back to death poetry. The standout thing I discovered is that this is an area light in research. If I were to be searching for a PhD topic, then this would be in my top 3. However, reading Japanese would be essential for me so that I can read primary sources. And I don't have that in me, I fear. I've done all the languages that I'm going to do, I reckon. And because of that, I wonder how many of the sources I've read for today's podcast were able to go back to those primary sources. I'm not convinced all of them did, so I'll do my best to bring you what I've learnt. But first, a question. How many of you have made a will? Hopefully all of you. It's a preparation for something you can't avoid, and it's going to help your family enormously when that time comes. And believe me, the last thing they need then will be uncertainty or extra stress. In Japanese culture, certainly in the past, the writing of Jisei were also a traditional part of preparing for death. In his book, Dreams Wander, on contemporary poems of death awareness, Robert Epstein proposes 3 types of death poem. The Jisei, which are traditionally written when you know your end is nearing, that is, when you're about to expire. Zekku, which tend to be the last poem that a poet has written, probably not written with an awareness that it's the last poem they're going to write, but nonetheless poignant by virtue of being the last. And then he talks of the death awareness poems, poems that a poet chooses to write with their death in mind. Today, we'll concentrate mainly on Jisei and the death awareness poems. I found a quote by the translator Eso about the poetry of the great man himself. It says, "The haiku he, Basho, composed each day was his death verse for that day." To me, it suggests that I take every care with the poems that I write, imagining that my family might pick up my notes and find something incomprehensible written there and still publish it. I wonder what they'd make of today's effort. The sun too low to light the valley, another day in shadow. The sun too low to light the valley, another day in shadow. So I've just written this, but it's not been edited, and I know I want to change things. And if the worst came to the worst, I'd definitely come back to haunt them from the afterlife if they published this version. So they have been warned. Hopefully we won't need it though. So typically, how are death poems written? They are, or they have been, kanshi, which, as you know, are Chinese style poems, tending to be longer in length than the tanka or the haiku. Historically, waka and latterly, of course, tanka were the choice of the majority of poets. There will be links in the show notes if you'd like to read some of the sources and explore the longer poems. Japanese poets have often employed symbolism to depict death, just as Western poets do. But rarely will you see death or dying mentioned in the poem itself. If we think in haiku terms, don't we try to show rather than tell? I always think of them as the poems of what is not said, because we as readers have to employ a little bit of our imagination to get the meaning of them. Now, I spoke a little bit about the sources, and to be honest with you, my research on this topic is going to have to go much deeper. Perhaps we can do this topic again, as we've done with other themes, learning in stratas, so to speak. Today, I'd like to give you a rough overview of some of the symbolism used in Japanese death poetry, and maybe give you some ideas for the poetry you'll send us next month. I do hope so. Often poems include an element of travel. Dying is seen and depicted as a journey. And as I think about this, I'm reminded of a reading at my father's funeral, and I suspect many others, from John, chapter 14. In my father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me. Many a time in the Japanese poetry, the travel of a dying person, or the travel of which a poet speaks, is done in a westerly direction. On its way west to paradise, migrating bird. On its way west to paradise, migrating bird. That was written by Joshi in 1768 and translated by Furuta Shokin. Why west? This is the direction of travel for the soul or spirit when you die, according to the belief of Pure Land Buddhism. For that is where the Pure Land lies. At least that's how I understand it. Could be wrong. My heart serene, I set out for the western skies. My heart serene, I set out for the western skies. Hakujabu. I'm afraid I don't know the translator. It does irritate me when sources don't give translators. But what I do enjoy about this poem is the sense of calm, the acceptance of death. And as I read it, I wonder to myself, do you need a religious belief to accept death? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's only the certainty you need that either there is a new beginning or that the end of life is the end of life, the end of everything. What do you think? The next area of symbolism intrigued me. I've termed it descent, or maybe you could say burial. Bury me next to friendly people. I like to talk a lot. Bury me next to friendly people. I like to talk a lot. Hal Kapler. And I found this in Western Death Haiku, written by George Swede. I think if I was writing it, it would have to be bury me next to people who read. I like a lot of silence. Though moss will overgrow my useless corpse, the seeds of patriotism shall ne'er decay. Though moss will overgrow my useless corpse, the seeds of patriotism shall ne'er decay. Nomura Botto, who lived between 1806 and 67 and who was translated by Haruta Shoken. In ye olden days, even before I was born, so a long, long time ago, in fact, I'm talking about the 8th century, the Kojiki, a chronicle of sagas and myths, was compiled. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect that up till that point, these stories were told orally and passed on from one generation to the next. One of these stories was about a brother and sister, twins, Izanagi and Izanami. The gods told them to marry each other. Apparently they too are gods, and were seen as the gods who created the islands of Japan, and various other gods as they went along. The story goes that when Izanami gives birth to the god of fire, she dies, and descends to the land of the dead, called Yomi. Izanagi, her brother, goes there to find her and ask her to return to the living. But she's unable to come back, because she's eaten food from the furnace of Yomi. But she promises to speak with the gods and ask if it would be possible. She says to Izanagi that he should not look at her while they wait for a decision. I think we all know what's coming. Of course he looks, and he sees a sight he regrets seeing. Her body riddled with maggots. So he leaves for the land of the living, and ashamed, Izanami sends the gods of thunder and the hags of Yomi after him to pursue him. What do they say about a woman scorned? Izanagi distracts them, firstly by throwing down the vine and comb holding his hair back, which turn into grapes and bamboo shoots, and the hags stop to devour them. Then, when he reaches the pass between the world of the living and the world of the dead, he throws peaches at his pursuers, and these repel them. And because of that, he declared the peach tree as divine, a tree that would always help the needy. Then Izanami herself comes after him, and to stop her he places a boulder at the entrance of Yomi, blocking her exit. Thwarted, she threatens to kill 1,000 people a day, to which he replies he would give birth to 1,500. And that seems to have put paid to that. Disgusted with what he's seen, Izanagi returns to the land of the living and undergoes a rite of purification. During this rite, as he washes himself, he gives birth to 3 more gods, known as the 3 precious children, the sun, the moon, and the storm deities. When you read these myths and sagas from other cultures and countries, you can often find similarities to those of your own, can't you? Anyway, isn't it a possibility that death poems, speaking of descent or some form of burial, reflect the common practice of laying the dead to rest in the ground? And possibly the idea of a land below the surface of the earth, inhabited by the dead. Similarly, ascent into the sky or to the mountains might often include references to mist or clouds, which represent the dead. Joel Hoffman, in his book Japanese Death Poems, suggests this might be due to cremation becoming a popular way of disposing of the dead, rather than burial. Such death poems, those containing mists and clouds, do seem to come later in the evolution of the death poem. In these examples, we can see ascension, but no clouds or mist. 450 years I've hung the sky with stars. Now I leap through. What shattering! 450 years I've hung the sky with stars. Now I leap through. What shattering! Dogen, who lived from 1200 to 1253 roughly, and it's translated by Lucian Streich and Ikimoto Takashi. Adrift between the earth and sky, I call to the east and change it to the west. I flourish my staff and return once again to my source. Katsu. Adrift between the earth and sky, I call to the east and change it to the west. I flourish my staff and return once again to my source. Katsu. That's by Shonoka Suen. Written roughly 1611 and translated by Furuta Shokin. Mountains, so I've read, are perhaps the most important of the symbols used in death poetry. Seen in certain Japanese religions as the dwelling place of the gods, they are places of life, a place that maybe we could be reborn. And of course, death is often seen as a journey through the mountains. Mount Fuji's melting snow is the ink with which I sign my life's scroll. Yours sincerely, Kashiku. Mount Fuji's melting snow is the ink with which I sign my life's scroll. Yours sincerely, Kashiku. Kashiku, translated by Furuta Shokin. This next one is from the Manyoshi. Not knowing that my body lies upon Mount Carmo's rocks, my love awaits me. Not knowing that my body lies upon Mount Carmo's rocks, my love awaits me. Hitomaru, translated by Furuta Shokin. Island of Eternity. A turtle dries its shell out in the first sun rays of the year. Island of Eternity. A turtle dries its shell out in the first sun rays of the year. By Sei, written around 1745 and translated by Furuta Shokin. Apparently, the Island of Eternity comes from the Japanese word hore, which traditionally referred to a mountain where the secret of immortality could be found. The reference to the turtle suggests longevity. clouds low on the hills, I grow old in the lingering chill, and the rain is steady. Clouds low on the hills, I grow old in the lingering chill, and the rain is steady. Jerry Bull. Which was taken from Robert Epstein's Dreams Wander On, as is this next one. Low clouds or high fog, heaven glimpsed through black pines, peace now and later. Low clouds or high fog, heaven glimpsed through black pines, peace now and later. Michael Henry Lee. The dark cloud slowly lifts, and I see snow-covered hills shining in distant sunlight. The dark cloud slowly lifts, and I see snow-covered hills shining in distant sunlight. Jerry Jacobson, Tea Towel Tanker, 2008. And now we're going to travel on the seas. 6 and 60, setting sail in tranquil water, breeze among the lotus. 6 and 60, setting sail in tranquil water, breeze among the lotus. Jisei, written around 1764 and translated by Furuta Shokin. And to explain the symbolism in this one, the poet, quite clearly, is setting sail in the 66th year of his life. The water he's sailing on is tranquil, indicating that he is calm, and the breeze among the lotus is that of the wind across the lake of the afterlife. Someone who is contemplating death and quite serene about it. As I moved from travel to the next of our symbols, this time an animal, a bird, I was struck again that all our cultures probably had similar belief systems way back. Did you know that the early Japanese were sun worshippers? Remember that book of myths, the Kojiki? It has lots of tales, but another I'd like to mention is that of a Japanese maiden made pregnant by the sun, who went on to give birth to a red stone. A prince from what is modern-day Korea saw the stone, begged to have it, and was given it. And he took it home, where eventually it turned into a beautiful woman who he married. Subsequently, he mistreated this woman, and she returned to Japan, to Osaka, and he followed her to bring her back. The god of the Osaka area would not allow him to land. And this beautiful woman was venerated as a god in her own right and had a shrine dedicated to her. And certainly this first part of this story reminded me of a very Christian story. I'll leave you to guess which one, but I think it's fairly obvious. But going back to sun worshipping, you'll find instances, certainly in Europe, in the pagan rites of worship. Think of Stonehenge and the summer solstice, or the winter solstice at Newgrange in the Irish Republic. Here, on the occasion of the winter solstice, at sunrise, a beam of light illuminates the Neolithic burial chamber. Light chases the darkness away. And this tomb goes back to around 3,200 years before Christ. There's a lottery to go and see it. I do apply from time to time, but I've never made it. But a friend of mine was there last year. She said it was amazing. Anyway, I think this example illustrates the similarities in our cultures. It might also explain why journeys and movements towards the west are often important. The sun moves from east to west in a day. We have the beginning and the end, east and west. And wherever we are in the world, that's the case. So, let's get back on track to animals. Next up, ravens. And the raven symbolizes the soul of the dead. Give my dream back, raven. The moon you woke me to is misted over. Give my dream back, raven. The moon you woke me to is misted over. On Itsura, written in about 1738 and translated by Furuta Shokin. Is it me the raven calls from the world of shades this frosty morning? Is it me the raven calls from the world of shades this frosty morning? Shukabu, written around 1775 and translated by Furuta Shokin. There is a juxtaposition. For me, anyway, there are the first two lines versus the final one, and yet you could read it as a run-on sentence. I don't think it makes it any the worse for that. But I'm prepared for emails to tell me I'm completely wrong. I spent so much time researching this podcast and thinking about symbolism that when I went out on my bike this morning, I was a little bit spooked, to be honest. And I wrote this one specially for you. 3 ravens, the cycle route home, car free. 3 ravens, the cycle route home, car free. Obviously not published because I only wrote it this morning. And if my family are listening, if anything happens to me, I'd rather you use that one because it's so much more me than the previous one. Obviously, though, I did make it home unscathed. Now, the next symbol I wanted to bring you is the cuckoo. And here I'm going to veer away from the Japanese. I'm always delighted to hear the cuckoo sing. Could just be me, though, because it reminds me of my grandmother. So if you disagree, write and tell me. In May, it sings all day, she used to tell me. Such a happy thought, at least for me. But for the Japanese, apparently, the Hototo Gishu, or cuckoo, is symbolically seen as the messenger of death. Apparently, it has a red mouth. I've never been up so close and personal with one myself. But it's often said that as the bird sings, blood flows. In this next poem, Bokuke writes as a result of falling in battle, sustaining a fatal injury. Cuckoo, I too sing, spitting blood, my welling thoughts. Cuckoo, I too sing, spitting blood, my welling thoughts. Bokuke, translated by Furuta Shokin. As are the next 3 poems. Looking back at the valley, no more dwellings, only the cuckoo cries. Looking back at the valley, no more dwellings, only the cuckoo cries. Baku, written around 1751. Cuckoo, let's go. How bright the western skies. Cuckoo, let's go. How bright the western skies. Jakua, written around 1801. A man clearly not afraid of death, it would seem. Cuckoo, take me up to where the clouds drift. Cuckoo, take me up to where the clouds drift. Yuko, written around 1743. I'd like to end this episode with a few death poems that tickled me. Yes, there can be humour in your death poetry. I think we've seen a little bit, but here's some more. Bury me when I die beneath the wine barrel in a tavern. With luck, the cask will leak. Bury me when I die beneath a wine barrel in a tavern. With luck, the cask will leak. Mariah Senan, translated by Furuta Shokin. Should someone ask where Sokan went, just say he had some business in the other world. Should someone ask where Sokan went, just say he had some business in the other world. Sokan, translated by Furuta Shokin. His ashes scattered. What to do with the box? His ashes scattered. What to do with the box? Paul Watsky, from First Thoughts, a Haiku Primer, by Jim Cation. What indeed, Paul, what indeed? Well, remember I said that you don't have to write your death poem right before you take your last breath. I read this story in Japanese death poems. I thought you might like it. Narushima Chuhachiro, a man who, fearing that he might die without warning and be unable to write a farewell poem, began writing death poems at the age of 50-odd years, sending them for criticism to his poetry master, Reitze Tamiyashu. At the age of 80, he wrote, "For 80 years and more, by the grace of my sovereign and my parents, I have lived with a tranquil heart between the flowers and the moon. For 80 years and more, by the grace of my sovereign and my parents, I have lived with a tranquil heart between the flowers and the moon." As usual, he sent the poem to Reitze, who replied, "When you reach age 90, correct the first line." I think he smashed it, don't you? And one last haiku, which I think falls into the death awareness category. Ordering my tombstone, the cutter has me feel his Gothic R. Ordering my tombstone, the cutter has me feel his Gothic R. Raymond Roseleep. And I got that from Terebes Online. Thank you for joining me today. There will be several links for you to follow up on the website. And if you're not an ISA or Buson member, then you can access the show notes on the website. But I'll probably put them up after the second part of this podcast. Remember, there will be bonus content. And one last reminder for you, the submission period for this topic is the 1st to the 15th of April 2025. And if you've missed it, check out the drop-down menu for submissions on the website, see what we're up to. And don't forget the video prompt on Poetry P's YouTube channel. And while you're there, why not subscribe? Enjoy something for free. This is important. Submissions for the death poetry can be either tanka or haiku this time. As I sincerely hope you're not on your last legs, let's regard this exercise as a preparation or awareness of death submission. And your poems don't have to be mournful. As you've seen, you can use humour too. So, join me next time for more terrific death poetry, including those of the masters. But until then, keep writing. And there are links on the website for this episode, as there will be for the next one. Don't forget to go and have a look, because there are many, many more poems you can access via those links. Ciao.